The helicopter touched down on the aircraft carrier deck with a heavy thud, its rotors still spinning as Lieutenant Sarah Viper Martinez stepped onto the metal surface. The salt spray from the Pacific Ocean hit her face as she walked across the deck, her boots clicking against the steel. She had been called to the USS Gerald Ford for an emergency briefing, though nobody had told her why. Sarah had earned her call sign Viper during her time as a Navy intelligence analyst. She had a reputation for striking fast and accurately when it came to predicting enemy movements. Her colleagues respected her sharp mind and ability to see patterns others missed. At 28, she was one of the youngest analysts to be assigned to such high-level operations. The interior of the ship was buzzing with activity. Sailors moved quickly through the narrow corridors, their faces tense with the kind of urgency that meant something big was happening. Sarah made her way to the command center, following the directions given to her by a young petty officer. When she entered the briefing room, she immediately noticed the tension in the air. Several high-ranking officers sat around a large table covered with maps and satellite images. At the head of the table sat Admiral Robert Kane, a man known throughout the Navy for his tough leadership style and his background as a former Navy SEAL. Admiral Kane was a legend in military circles. He had led dozens of dangerous missions during his time as a SEAL operator, before moving up the ranks to become one of the most respected commanders in the Pacific Fleet. His weathered face showed the scars of combat, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through anyone who looked at him. Sarah stood at attention as she entered the room, waiting for permission to sit. The Admiral looked up from the documents he was studying and gave her a long, hard stare. She could feel the eyes of every other officer in the room on her, measuring her up. "So you're the famous analyst we've heard so much about," Admiral Kane said, his voice carrying a tone that wasn't quite respectful. "Lieutenant Martinez, is it? They tell me you have some kind of special talent for reading the enemy's mind." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though she could sense the skepticism in his voice. "I analyze patterns in enemy behavior and communications, sir. I look for indicators that might reveal their intentions." The Admiral leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Right. And what's your call sign again, Lieutenant?" "Viper, sir." Admiral Kane let out a short laugh that didn't sound friendly. "Viper? That's quite a name for someone who spends their time looking at computer screens instead of facing real danger. Tell me, Lieutenant Viper, have you ever been in actual combat?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the other officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. She knew this was some kind of test, but she wasn't sure what the Admiral was trying to prove. "No, sir, I haven't been in direct combat," Sarah answered honestly. "My role is intelligence analysis and strategic assessment." "I see," the Admiral said, his tone suggesting he wasn't impressed. "Well, Lieutenant Viper, we have a situation that requires more than just looking at patterns on a computer screen. We need someone who understands how real warriors think and act." He gestured to the maps spread across the table. Sarah could see they showed the South China Sea, with various markers indicating ship positions and potential threat areas. Red circles marked several locations that appeared to be areas of concern. "For the past week, we've been tracking unusual activity from hostile forces in this region," Admiral Kane continued. "Our traditional intelligence methods haven't been able to predict their next move. Ships appearing where they shouldn't be, movements that don't follow normal patterns." Sarah studied the maps carefully, her trained eye immediately picking up several interesting details. The positioning of the markers suggested a pattern that wasn't random, but she needed more information to be certain. "What kind of unusual activity, sir?" she asked. Commander Williams, the ship's intelligence officer, spoke up. "Submarine movements that don't match their usual patrol routes. Surface vessels conducting exercises in areas they normally avoid. Communications traffic that suggests they're planning something significant but we can't figure out what." Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "How long have these patterns been developing?" "About 10 days, Commander Williams replied. "It started small, just a few unusual movements, but it's been escalating every day." Admiral Kane watched Sarah carefully as she absorbed this information. "The problem, Lieutenant Viper, is that we need to know what they're planning before they do it. Our current intelligence team has been guessing wrong for the past week. Every prediction they've made has been incorrect." Sarah could hear the frustration in his voice. She understood the pressure he was under. In naval operations, being wrong about enemy intentions could mean the difference between success and disaster, between life and death for thousands of sailors. "I'd like to see all the available data," Sarah said. Communication intercepts, satellite imagery, ship movement logs, anything that might show a pattern. The Admiral raised an eyebrow. You think you can do better than our experienced intelligence team? I think fresh eyes might see something that's been missed, Sarah replied diplomatically. Admiral Kane stood up and walked to the large screen at the front of the room. Here's the situation, Lieutenant. In 12 hours, our task force is scheduled to move through a critical shipping lane. If the enemy is planning an ambush or some kind of coordinated attack, we need to know about it before we get there. He turned back to face her, his expression serious. Lives are at stake here. This isn't some academic exercise where you can take your time to analyze data and write a nice report. We need answers, and we need them fast. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She understood that this was more than just a briefing. This was her chance to prove that her methods could work in real-world, high-stakes situations. I understand the urgency, sir. If I could have access to your intelligence systems in about 6 hours to analyze the data, I believe I can provide you with a more accurate assessment of enemy intentions. Admiral Kane exchanged glances with the other officers in the room. Sarah could see doubt in their faces, but also a hint of desperate hope. They had been getting nowhere with their current approach, and time was running out. 6 hours, the Admiral said finally. That's all you get, Lieutenant Viper. And if you're wrong, if your analysis leads us into a trap, the consequences will be on your head. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the Admiral's eyes. I understand, sir. I won't let you down. As the briefing ended and the other officers filed out of the room, Sarah remained behind to study the maps more closely. She could feel Admiral Kane watching her, his expression unreadable. She knew that the next few hours would determine not only the success of the mission, but also whether her reputation and methods would be accepted by the traditional military establishment. The challenge had been set. Now she had to prove that Viper was more than just a flashy call sign. Sarah made her way to the Intelligence Center, a high-tech room filled with computers, monitors, and communication equipment. The space hummed with electronic activity, screens displaying real-time data from satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and naval vessels spread across the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander James Torres, the ship's senior intelligence analyst, greeted her with obvious skepticism. He was a veteran officer with 15 years of experience, and Sarah could tell he wasn't happy about having an outsider brought in to review his work. So you're the hotshot analyst they brought in to solve our problems, Torres said, his tone barely concealing his irritation. I've been doing this job since before you graduated from college, and I'm telling you, there's no clear pattern in this data. Sarah kept her response professional. I'm not here to replace anyone or criticize previous work. I just want to look at the information with fresh eyes. Sometimes a different perspective can reveal things that weren't obvious before. Torres shrugged and gestured to a workstation. Be my guest, but you're wasting your time. We've run every analysis program we have, cross-referenced every piece of intelligence, and checked every possible correlation. Whatever they're planning, they're being very careful to hide it. Sarah sat down at the computer terminal and began pulling up data files. The amount of information was overwhelming. Thousands of intercepts, satellite photos, ship tracking reports, and communication logs. She started with the most recent data and worked backward, looking for any subtle changes in patterns. For the first hour, she found nothing that Torres and his team hadn't already identified. The enemy movements did seem random, with no clear objective or strategy. Ships moving in unexpected directions, submarines diving and surfacing in areas that made no tactical sense, communications that seemed to be routine but were happening at unusual times. But Sarah had learned to look beyond the obvious. During her training, she had studied the psychology of military deception. She knew that the best military minds didn't just hide their real intentions, they created false patterns to mislead their enemies. She began mapping out the enemy movements on a different timeline, focusing not on where the ships were going, but on when they were moving. Slowly, a different picture began to emerge. The movements weren't random at all. They were carefully timed to create the impression of chaos, while actually following a very sophisticated plan. Sarah called up historical data from similar operations. She compared the current patterns with previous enemy tactics, looking for similarities in timing, positioning, and communication procedures. After 2 hours of intense analysis, she found something interesting. The enemy was using a technique called false clustering. They were deliberately creating obvious patterns in some areas while hiding their real activities in others. The ships and submarines that were acting strangely were decoys, designed to draw attention away from a different group of vessels that were moving much more quietly. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized what she was seeing. While everyone was watching the obvious movements in the main shipping lanes, a separate force was positioning itself in an area that appeared to be empty ocean. But when she overlaid the shipping schedules with tidal charts and weather patterns, she could see that this empty area would be directly in the path of the American task force. She cross-referenced the positioning with historical attack patterns and found several matches with previous ambush operations. The enemy was setting up a classic pincer movement, using their obvious ships as bait while their real attack force waited in a position where they couldn't be easily detected. Sarah's hands moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up more data to confirm her theory. She analyzed the fuel consumption patterns of the decoy ships and realized they were burning fuel at a rate that would allow them to maintain their current activities for exactly 12 hours. The same amount of time until the American task force was scheduled to enter the danger zone. Everything fit together perfectly. The enemy had planned a sophisticated deception operation designed to catch the American fleet off guard. The obvious ship movements were meant to confuse and misdirect, while the real threat was building up in an area that appeared safe. Sarah stood up from her workstation, her heart racing with excitement and concern. She had found the pattern, but now she had to convince Admiral Kane and his staff that her analysis was correct. Given the Admiral's obvious skepticism about her abilities, this wasn't going to be easy. She gathered her findings into a presentation, organizing the data in a way that would clearly show the deception pattern. She included satellite images, movement charts, and communication analysis that supported her theory. Most importantly, she prepared a clear prediction of where and when the enemy would strike. As Sarah finished her analysis, she realized that time was running out faster than she had expected. It had taken her 4 hours to piece together the enemy's plan, leaving only 2 hours before the task force would begin its movement into the danger zone. She made her way back to the command center, carrying a tablet with her presentation and a printed backup of the most critical data. The corridors of the ship seemed more tense now, with crew members moving with the urgency that came before major operations. When she entered the command center, she found Admiral Kane studying weather reports with his senior staff. The atmosphere in the room was tense, with officers speaking in low, urgent tones about preparations for the upcoming movement. "Admiral Kane, sir," Sarah said, stepping forward. "I've completed my analysis of the enemy movements." The Admiral looked up from his charts, his expression showing both hope and skepticism. "That was fast, Lieutenant. What did you find?" Sarah activated her tablet and connected it to the room's display system. "Sir, I believe the enemy is conducting a sophisticated deception operation. The obvious ship movements that have been confusing our intelligence are actually decoys." She displayed her first chart, showing the timeline of enemy activities. "If you look at the timing and coordination of these movements, they're too precise to be random. Someone is orchestrating this entire operation." Commander Williams leaned forward, studying the display. "But our analysts have been tracking all these vessels. There's no coordination pattern that we can detect." Sarah switched to her next slide, showing the fuel consumption analysis. "That's because we've been looking at the wrong vessels. These ships that are acting obviously suspicious are burning fuel at exactly the rate needed to maintain their current operations for 12 hours. That's not a coincidence." Admiral Kane's expression was unreadable as he studied the data. "Go on, Lieutenant." Sarah displayed the satellite imagery showing the area where she believed the real threat was building. While everyone has been watching the decoy ships, a separate force has been quietly positioning itself here. The location appears to be empty ocean, but when you factor in our planned route and timing, it's the perfect position for an ambush. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed this information. Sarah could see doubt and concern on their faces, but also recognition that her analysis made sense. "You're saying that everything we've been tracking for the past week is a fake?" Torres asked, his voice showing disbelief. "Not fake," Sarah replied. "Real ships, real movements, but designed to hide the real operation. It's a classic misdirection technique. Make the obvious so obvious that your enemy doesn't look for the subtle." Admiral Kane stood up and walked to the display, studying Sarah's analysis carefully. The next few minutes would determine whether her reputation would be made or destroyed. Admiral Kane studied Sarah's analysis for several long minutes, his weathered fingers tracing the projected enemy positions on the display screen. The command center had fallen completely silent, except for the low hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of the ship's engines. "Lieutenant, this is a very serious accusation," the Admiral said finally. "You're telling me that my entire intelligence team has been chasing shadows for a week, while the real threat has been building up right under our noses." Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but she maintained her composure. "Sir, I'm not criticizing the previous analysis. The deception was very sophisticated. It was designed to fool exactly the kind of traditional intelligence gathering that we normally rely on." Commander Williams stepped closer to the display, pointing at the area where Sarah claimed the real enemy force was hidden. "But we've had satellites scanning this entire region. If there were hostile vessels in this area, we would have detected them." "Not necessarily," Sarah replied, switching to a new slide that showed ocean depth charts and weather patterns. "This area has been experiencing unusual weather conditions for the past week. Heavy cloud cover, rough seas, and electromagnetic interference from a storm system that passed through 3 days ago. Perfect conditions for hiding submarine movements and masked ship positions." She highlighted specific time periods on her charts. "Look at the timing. Every major movement by the decoy ships happened during periods when satellite coverage of this area was compromised by weather." "That's not a coincidence." Lieutenant Commander Torres shook his head in disbelief. "Even if you're right about the weather providing cover, how could they coordinate such a complex operation without us intercepting their communications?" Sarah had anticipated this question. She pulled up her communication analysis, showing frequency patterns and transmission timing. "They're using a technique called burst communication masking. They're hiding their real operational communications inside routine weather reports and commercial shipping updates." She displayed a series of seemingly innocent messages that had been transmitted over the past week. "These look like standard maritime communications, but when you analyze the timing and frequency patterns, they contain embedded operational codes. The real orders are hidden in plain sight." Admiral Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the weight of the decision he had to make. Sarah could see that he was torn between skepticism and the growing realization that her analysis might be correct. "Even if we accept your theory," the Admiral said slowly, "what exactly are you predicting will happen?" Sarah switched to her final presentation slide, showing a detailed prediction of the enemy's attack plan. "Based on the positioning and timing, I believe they're planning a coordinated submarine and surface attack on our task force. The attack will begin approximately 30 minutes after we enter the shipping lane, when we're committed to our course and can't easily change direction." She pointed to specific locations on the map. "The submarines will attack from below while surface vessels emerge from hidden positions behind this chain of small islands. It's a classic pincer movement designed to trap our ships in a crossfire." The room erupted in concerned murmurs as the officers realized the implications of what Sarah was describing. If she was right, the task force was sailing directly into a carefully planned trap. Admiral Kane stood up and began pacing around the room, his mind clearly working through the tactical implications. "If your analysis is correct, Lieutenant, then we have less than 2 hours to completely change our operational plan." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "But I believe we can turn their trap against them. If we know where they're positioned and when they plan to attack, we can reverse the ambush." The Admiral stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Explain." Sarah felt her confidence growing as she outlined her counter-strategy. "Instead of avoiding the trap, we spring it early and on our terms. We send a small decoy force along our original route, while our main task force approaches from a different direction. When the enemy reveals themselves to attack what they think is our main force, we attack them from behind." Commander Williams looked skeptical. "That's an extremely risky strategy. If you're wrong about the enemy positions, we could be sending our ships into a real ambush. And if we follow our original plan and I'm right," Sarah countered, "we'll definitely be sailing into an ambush with no preparation or backup plan." Admiral Kane returned to his chair and stared at the display screen for several minutes. Sarah could feel the tension in the room as everyone waited for his decision. She knew that her entire career was riding on this moment. If she was wrong, not only would her reputation be destroyed, but lives could be lost. "Lieutenant Torres," the Admiral said finally, "I want you to run a complete verification of Lieutenant Martinez's analysis." Use every resource we have. Check her data, confirm her assumptions, and tell me if you think she's right. Torres looked uncomfortable with the assignment, but he nodded. Yes, sir. How much time do I have? 30 minutes, the Admiral replied. That's all the time we can spare. As Torres and his team began frantically checking Sarah's work, Admiral Kane pulled her aside for a private conversation. They walked to a quiet corner of the command center where they couldn't be overheard. Lieutenant, I need you to understand something, the Admiral said, his voice low and serious. I've been in the Navy for 25 years. I've led men into combat situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Right now, I'm being asked to bet the lives of 3,000 sailors on the analysis of someone I've never worked with before. Sarah felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Sir, I understand the stakes. I've checked and double-checked my analysis. I'm confident in my conclusions. Confident isn't good enough, the Admiral replied sharply. I need to know that you're certain. Because if you're wrong, if we change our plans based on your analysis and it turns out to be incorrect, people are going to die. Sarah met his gaze directly, her voice steady and clear. Sir, I am certain. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. The enemy has spent a week setting up this deception, and they're counting on us to follow our predictable patterns. If we do what they expect, we'll be walking into their trap. Admiral Kane studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. And you're willing to stake your career on this analysis? I'm willing to stake more than my career, Sarah replied. I'm willing to stake the lives of everyone on this task force because I believe that's what I'm doing regardless of which choice we make. The difference is that my way gives us a fighting chance. The Admiral nodded slowly, some of the skepticism fading from his expression. I can see why they gave you the call sign Viper. You strike hard and fast when you're sure of your target. Before Sarah could respond, Torres called out from across the room. Admiral, I've completed my verification check. Everyone in the command center turned to look at Torres, waiting for his assessment. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized that the next few words would determine everything. Torres looked directly at Sarah, his expression a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. Sir, I hate to admit it, but I think she's right. When you look at the data the way she's analyzed it, the deception pattern becomes obvious. I don't know how we missed it. Admiral Kane turned back to Sarah, his expression now showing a different kind of respect. Well, Lieutenant Viper, it looks like you've earned your call sign. Now let's see if you can help us turn this trap around on our enemies. The next hour passed in a blur of intense activity, as Admiral Kane and his staff worked to completely restructure their operational plan. The command center became a hive of focused energy, with officers rushing between stations and communication systems, crackling with urgent messages to other ships in the task force. Sarah found herself at the center of the planning process, her analysis serving as the foundation for an entirely new tactical approach. Admiral Kane had assigned her to work directly with the operations planning team, a clear sign that her credibility had been established. Lieutenant Martinez, Admiral Kane called out from the main planning table, I need you to walk through the timing of this enemy operation one more time. If we're going to reverse this ambush, we need to understand exactly when and how they plan to strike. Sarah moved to the central display and began outlining her timeline analysis. Based on the fuel consumption patterns and communication timing, the enemy has been positioning their forces for maximum effectiveness at exactly 1400 hours. That's when our task force was originally scheduled to be in the most vulnerable position in the shipping lane. She highlighted the predicted enemy positions on the tactical map. The submarines will likely begin their approach 30 minutes before the scheduled attack time, moving into optimal firing positions. The surface vessels will remain hidden behind these islands until the attack begins, then emerge to cut off our escape routes. Captain Morrison, the task force's tactical coordinator, studied the projections carefully. If Lieutenant Martinez is correct about their positioning, we could use the USS Hampton to approach their submarine positions from the north while they're focused on the shipping lane. Admiral Kane nodded, his tactical mind quickly grasping the possibilities. And if we time it right, we can catch their surface vessels while they're still in their hiding positions, before they have a chance to coordinate their attack. Sarah felt a surge of excitement as she watched the experienced officers build upon her analysis. This was exactly what she had hoped for, her intelligence work providing the foundation for a successful counter-operation. Sir, Commander Williams interjected, there's still the question of the decoy force. If we're going to make the enemy believe our main task force is following the original route, we need to make it convincing. Admiral Kane turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, how sophisticated do you think their surveillance capabilities are? Will they be able to tell the difference between a real task force and a smaller decoy group? Sarah considered the question carefully. Based on their communication patterns and the complexity of their deception operation, they're very sophisticated. But they're also committed to their plan. They've spent a week setting up this ambush, so they'll want to believe that it's working. If we can create enough electronic signatures and ship movements to match what they're expecting to see, they'll probably assume it's the real task force. What about using the USS Constellation and her escort group as the decoy? Captain Morrison suggested. They're smaller vessels, but with the right electronic countermeasures, we could make them appear to be a much larger force. Admiral Kane considered this option. That would work, but it puts Captain Rodriguez and his crew in significant danger. They'd be sailing directly into the enemies, trapped with only their own defensive capabilities. Sarah realized this was one of the harsh realities of military strategy that she had only read about in training manuals. Real operations involved real people taking real risks. Her analysis wasn't just about patterns and predictions anymore. It was about decisions that would put people in harm's way. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite her growing awareness of the stakes. If Captain Rodriguez's group can maintain the deception for just 20 minutes after entering the danger zone, that should be enough time for our main force to get into position for the counterattack. Admiral Kane picked up a secure communication device and contacted Captain Rodriguez directly. Sarah listened as he explained the situation and the proposed plan. The conversation was brief and professional, but she could hear the tension in both officers' voices. Rodriguez understands the risks, Admiral Kane said after ending the call. His ship and crew are ready to serve as the decoy force. Now we need to make sure our counterattack is perfectly coordinated. The next 30 minutes were spent refining every detail of the revised operation. Sarah worked with the communications team to identify the best ways to monitor enemy communications during the attack, looking for any signs that their deception had been discovered. She also collaborated with the tactical team to predict how the enemy would react when they realized they had been outmaneuvered. Based on their previous operations, they'll probably try to scatter and escape, rather than continue a fight they can't win, she explained. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that they'll try to attack our decoy force out of frustration or revenge. As the final preparations were completed, Admiral Kane called for a brief meeting with his senior staff. Sarah was surprised when he asked her to attend, recognizing that she had become an integral part of the command team. Ladies and gentlemen, the Admiral began, his voice carrying the authority of command. In 15 minutes, we're going to execute one of the most complex counterintelligence operations I've ever been part of. Lieutenant Martinez has provided us with intelligence that could save thousands of lives. But the success of this operation depends on perfect execution by every member of this task force. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each officer. Captain Rodriguez and his crew are taking the greatest risk by serving as our decoy force. Our job is to make sure their sacrifice isn't wasted. We need to be in position and ready to strike before the enemy realizes what's happening. Admiral Kane then turned to Sarah, his expression showing a respect that hadn't been there a few hours earlier. Lieutenant Martinez, I owe you an apology. When you first walked into this command center, I judged you based on my preconceptions about desk analysts who've never been in combat. I was wrong. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with the unexpected praise, but she kept her response professional. Thank you, sir. I'm just glad I could help. You've done more than help, the Admiral continued. You've potentially saved this entire task force from walking into a carefully planned trap. That takes more than just analytical skills. It takes courage to stand by your convictions when lives are on the line. As the meeting concluded and officers began moving to their battle stations, Admiral Kane asked Sarah to remain behind for a moment. Lieutenant, I want you to stay in the command center during the operation, he said. Your analysis got us this far, but I may need your insights if the situation changes or if the enemy doesn't react the way we expect. Sarah nodded, feeling both honored and nervous about being included in the actual combat operation. I'll do whatever I can to help, sir. Admiral Kane smiled for the first time since she had met him. I have a feeling that before this is over, Lieutenant Viper, You're going to understand exactly why they gave you that call sign. As the task force began moving into position for the counter-ambush, Sarah realized that her career had just taken a dramatic turn. She was no longer just an analyst studying patterns from a safe distance. She was now part of an active military operation where her insights would be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. The command center transformed into a nerve center of controlled intensity as the operation began. Multiple screens displayed real-time positions of friendly and suspected enemy vessels, while communication stations crackled with coded messages between ships. Sarah stood behind Admiral Kane's command position, her tablet ready with updated analysis as the situation developed. Constellation Group is approaching the shipping lane entry point, Commander Williams reported from the communications station. Captain Rodriguez reports all systems normal and electronic countermeasures active. Sarah watched the tactical display as the small decoy force moved steadily toward what they all believed was an enemy trap. The USS Constellation and her 2 escort vessels were deliberately making themselves appear to be a much larger task force through sophisticated electronic deception systems that amplified their radar and communication signatures. Any reaction from the suspected enemy positions? Admiral Kane asked. Lieutenant Commander Torres, who had become much more respectful of Sarah's analysis, monitored the intelligence feeds. Negative, sir. We're picking up some increased communication activity, but it appears to be routine coordination chatter. Sarah studied the communication patterns on her tablet, comparing them to the baseline she had established earlier. Sir, the communication timing is consistent with final preparation activities. They're getting ready to execute their attack plan. Admiral Kane nodded, his eyes fixed on the main display. Hampton Group, report status. Captain Barnes's voice came through the communication system from the USS Hampton, one of the Navy's most advanced attack submarines. Hampton Group is in position and ready to engage enemy submarines on your command, sir. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized the operation was reaching its critical phase. The next 20 minutes would determine whether her analysis had been correct and whether the counter-ambush would succeed. Constellation is entering the target zone, Commander Williams announced. Time to suspected enemy attack, 18 minutes. Admiral Kane turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, based on your analysis, when should we expect the enemy submarines to begin their approach? Sarah consulted her timeline projections. They should start moving into attack positions within the next 5 minutes, sir. Once they commit to their approach, they'll be most vulnerable to our counterattack. As if on cue, the sonar operator called out, Contact! Multiple submarine signatures moving from the northern quadrant toward the shipping lane. Count appears to be 4 vessels, possibly more. The command center erupted in controlled activity as officers confirmed the detection and began coordinating the response. Sarah felt a surge of validation mixed with concern as her predictions proved accurate. Hampton, you have multiple submarine contacts bearing 045 degrees from your position. Admiral Kane commanded. You are cleared to engage when ready. Hampton confirms contact and is moving to intercept, Captain Barnes responded. Estimated time to engagement, 8 minutes. Sarah watched the tactical display as the underwater chess game began to unfold. The enemy submarines were moving exactly as she had predicted, approaching what they believed was an unsuspecting American task force. Meanwhile, the USS Hampton was positioning itself for a surprise attack from their blind spot. Sir, Torres called out from the intelligence station, we're detecting increased surface activity behind the island chain. It looks like surface vessels are beginning to move into position. Admiral Kane turned to Captain Morrison. Time for our surface group to begin their approach? Surface attack group is ready to move on your command, sir, Morrison replied. Sarah studied the timing carefully. Everything was proceeding according to her analysis, but she knew that the most dangerous part was yet to come. Sir, once the enemy realizes they've been deceived, they may react unpredictably. We need to be prepared for them to break from their planned operation. Understood, Lieutenant. All units maintain maximum readiness for tactical changes. The tension in the command center was palpable, as everyone waited for the first shots to be fired. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched the displays show, friendly and enemy forces moving closer to contact. Hampton reports torpedo lock on lead enemy submarine, the communications officer announced, requesting permission to engage. Admiral Kane's voice was steady and decisive. Hampton, you are cleared to engage. The command center fell silent except for the hum of electronics as everyone waited for confirmation of the attack. Sarah realized that this was the moment when her analysis would be fully tested under combat conditions. Hampton reports successful engagement. One enemy submarine hit and sinking. Hampton is repositioning for second target. A subdued cheer went up from some of the younger officers, but Admiral Kane maintained his focus on the overall operation. Status of remaining enemy submarines? 3 contacts remaining, sir. They appear to be... Wait. The sonar operator paused, listening intently to his equipment. Sir, the enemy submarines are emergency surfacing. They're aborting their attack. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. Sir, this is consistent with their training doctrine. When surprised, they'll try to escape rather than continue an uncoordinated attack. But they may try to take the decoy force with them, Admiral Kane observed grimly. Constellation Group, be advised that enemy submarines are surfacing in your area. Take evasive action and prepare for possible surface engagement. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through with notable tension. Understood, Admiral. We have visual contact on 2 surface submarines at approximately 4,000 yards. They appear to be attempting to flee the area. Sarah quickly analyzed the new development. Sir, if the submarines are surfacing and fleeing, the surface vessels will likely abandon their ambush positions as well. This is our best opportunity to catch them before they can coordinate and escape. Admiral Kane immediately grasped the tactical opportunity. Surface Attack Group, proceed to intercept enemy vessels behind the island chain. Do not let them escape to fight another day. Surface Attack Group moving to intercept, came the response from Captain Stevens aboard the USS Princeton. We should have visual contact with enemy surface vessels in approximately 12 minutes. The operation was rapidly evolving from a defensive counter-ambush into an offensive pursuit. Sarah watched the tactical display as multiple groups of ships maneuvered across the ocean, each trying to gain advantage over their opponents. Hampton reports second enemy submarine destroyed, Torres announced. Remaining submarines are fleeing at maximum speed. Admiral Kane nodded with satisfaction. Let them go for now. Our priority is the surface vessels. They represent the greater long-term threat. Sarah noticed something unusual in the communication intercepts she was monitoring. Sir, I'm detecting emergency communications between the fleeing submarines and another unit. The signal strength suggests there may be additional enemy vessels that we haven't accounted for. The Admiral's expression became more serious. What kind of vessels, Lieutenant? I can't be certain from the communication patterns alone, but the signal characteristics suggest larger surface vessels, possibly including a command ship, Sarah replied, her mind racing through the possibilities. Admiral Kane turned to Torres. Run a complete sweep of all intelligence data. Are there any enemy vessels in this area that we haven't identified? As Torres and his team began frantically searching through their databases, Sarah continued monitoring the enemy communications. The pattern of signals was becoming clearer, and what she was seeing made her increasingly concerned. Sir, she said, her voice urgent, I believe there's an enemy command vessel coordinating the entire operation from a position we haven't identified. The communication timing and signal strength suggest it's much closer than we thought. Before Admiral Kane could respond, the radar operator called out in alarm. Multiple new contacts appearing on radar. Large surface vessels approaching from the southeast at high speed. The command center erupted in activity as everyone realized that the enemy had held back a reserve force. Sarah's analysis had been correct about the initial ambush, but there was another layer to the enemy's plan that even she hadn't anticipated. Count and classification of new contacts? Admiral Kane demanded. 6 vessels, sir. At least 2 appear to be heavy cruisers, possibly more. They're approaching fast and will be in weapons range of the Constellation Group in 15 minutes. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. The enemy had planned not just one ambush, but a series of coordinated attacks. If the first ambush failed, they had a backup force ready to destroy whatever American vessels were in the area. All units. We have a new tactical situation, Admiral Kane announced over the communication system. Large enemy force approaching from the southeast. Constellation Group, withdraw immediately to Rally Point Alpha. Sir, Captain Rodriguez responded, we're taking fire from the surfaced submarines. Our evasive maneuvering is limited. The situation was rapidly becoming critical. The small decoy force was trapped between the submarines they had already engaged. and a much larger enemy force approaching from another direction. Sarah realized that her successful analysis of the first enemy plan had led them into an even more dangerous situation. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse, "I need to analyze the approach pattern of these new vessels. There might be a way to turn this situation around, but I need a few minutes to study their formation and timing." Admiral Kane looked at her with an expression that mixed hope with desperation. "You have 2 minutes, Lieutenant. After that, we may have to accept that we've walked into a trap that's bigger than any of us anticipated." As Sarah began frantically analyzing the new tactical situation, she realized that her reputation and the lives of thousands of sailors now depended on her ability to find a pattern in what appeared to be an overwhelming enemy advantage. The real test of her analytical skills was just beginning. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet as she pulled up every piece of available data about the approaching enemy force. The command center around her buzzed with urgent activity, but she forced herself to focus completely on the patterns emerging from the tactical information. "Talk to me, Lieutenant," Admiral Kane said, his voice tense as he watched the radar displays showing the enemy vessels closing distance with alarming speed. "What are you seeing?" Sarah studied the formation and approach timing of the new enemy ships. Something about their positioning seemed familiar, but she needed more data to be certain. "Sir, can I get the exact speed and bearing of each enemy vessel? And I need to know their fuel consumption rates if we have that information." "Torres, give Lieutenant Martinez everything she needs," Admiral Kane ordered. As the data flowed to her tablet, Sarah began to see a pattern that made her heart race with both excitement and concern. The enemy wasn't just sending a random rescue force, they were executing another carefully planned operation. "Admiral, these ships aren't just responding to our counterattack," Sarah announced. "Their approach timing and formation suggest this was always part of their original plan. They intended for us to discover and disrupt the first ambush." Admiral Kane stared at her in disbelief. "Are you saying this entire situation was designed to draw us into an even bigger trap?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her confidence growing as more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "The first ambush was meant to be discovered. They wanted us to think we were clever by turning it around, so we'd commit our forces to this area where they could bring in their main attack force." The implications of this revelation sent a chill through the command center. Not only had they walked into the enemy's trap, but they had done exactly what the enemy wanted them to do. "How much time do we have before the enemy force reaches attack range?" Admiral Kane asked grimly. 12 minutes, sir," Commander Williams replied. "And the Constellation Group is still taking fire from those surface submarines." Sarah continued analyzing the enemy formation, looking for any weakness or opportunity. The approaching force was powerful and well coordinated, but she had learned that even the best plans usually had vulnerabilities. "Sir," she said suddenly, "I think I found something. The enemy formation is optimized for attacking targets in the shipping lane, but they're approaching from a direction that leaves them vulnerable to attack from the north." Admiral Kane moved to the tactical display. "Explain." Sarah highlighted the enemy approach route on the screen. "They're maintaining formation discipline as they approach, which means they're not expecting to be attacked during their approach. If we could hit them from an unexpected angle while they're still in formation, we could disrupt their entire attack plan." "What assets do we have that could attack from the north?" Admiral Kane asked Captain Morrison. Morrison studied the display carefully. "The surface attack group that's pursuing the enemy vessels behind the islands could change course and approach from the north, but they'd have to break off their current engagement. And the Hampton could approach from underwater," Sarah added. "Submarines are most effective against surface ships when the ships aren't expecting them." Admiral Kane weighed the options quickly. The enemy force would be in attack range of the Constellation Group in less than 10 minutes. But changing the disposition of his own forces would take time and involve significant risks. "Captain Stevens, this is Admiral Kane," he called over the communication system. "Break off pursuit of enemy vessels behind the islands and proceed at maximum speed to intercept the main enemy force from the north." "Understood, Admiral." Breaking off current engagement and proceeding to new intercept course. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized they were about to test another of her tactical predictions under combat conditions. "Sir, there's one more thing. Based on the enemy's communication patterns, I believe their command ship is with this approaching force. If we can identify and target their command vessel, It might disrupt their entire operation. How do we identify which ship is their command vessel? Admiral Kane asked. Sarah switched to her communication analysis display. The command ship will have the most communication traffic and will be positioned to coordinate the attack. Based on the signal patterns I'm monitoring, it should be the second ship from the right in their formation. Admiral Kane studied the tactical situation one more time, then made his decision. All units were going to execute a coordinated counterattack. Hampton will approach the enemy formation from underwater and target their command vessel. Princeton Group will attack from the north to disrupt their formation. Constellation Group will continue evasive action until support arrives. As the orders went out to the various ship commanders, Sarah realized that once again, the success or failure of a major naval operation was depending on her analysis. The difference this time was that if she was wrong, there might not be an opportunity to recover from the mistake. Hampton reports approaching attack position, Torres announced. Estimated time to torpedo range, 6 minutes. Princeton Group reports maximum speed toward intercept position, Morrison added. Estimated time to weapons range, 8 minutes. Sarah watched the tactical display as friendly and enemy forces converged toward what would likely be the decisive engagement of the entire operation. The next few minutes would determine whether her analytical methods could succeed against an enemy that had anticipated and planned for their initial success. Lieutenant, Admiral Kane said quietly, I want you to know that regardless of how this turns out, you've already proven that your methods can work in real combat situations. You've earned the respect of every officer in this command center. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Thank you, sir. But let's wait to see if I've earned that respect before the shooting stops. As the enemy force closed to within minutes of attack range, Sarah noticed something new in the communication intercepts. The pattern of signals was changing in a way that suggested the enemy commander was beginning to realize that something was wrong with their plan. Sir, she said urgently, the enemy communications are showing signs of confusion. I think they're starting to realize that we're not reacting the way they expected. Admiral Kane leaned forward intently. Are they changing their plan? It's hard to tell, Sarah replied, studying the signal patterns carefully. But if they break formation now, it could either make them harder to attack or it could create opportunities we didn't expect. As everyone in the command center watched the tactical displays, Sarah realized that she was about to find out whether her analytical skills could keep up with the rapidly changing dynamics of actual naval combat. The enemy's next move would determine whether they had successfully predicted and countered the enemy's plan, or whether they were about to face an even more dangerous situation than they had originally anticipated. The final phase of the operation unfolded with breathtaking intensity. Sarah watched the tactical displays as multiple groups of warships maneuvered at high speed across the ocean, each trying to gain the crucial advantage that would determine the outcome of the engagement. Hampton reports torpedo lock on suspected enemy command vessel, the communications officer announced. Ready to fire on your command? Admiral Kane's voice was steady and decisive. Hampton, you are cleared to engage. Sarah held her breath as she watched the tactical display. Everything now depended on whether her analysis of the enemy command structure had been correct. If she had identified the wrong vessel as the command ship, the enemy would retain their coordination capability and could still execute their attack plan. Hampton reports torpedo impact on target, Torres called out moments later. Enemy vessel is taking on water and appears to be dead in the water. Almost immediately, Sarah noticed changes in the enemy communication patterns. The coordinated signal traffic that had characterized their approach began to break down into confused, uncoordinated transmissions, sir, she announced with growing excitement. Enemy communications are showing clear signs of command disruption. Individual ships are requesting orders but not receiving coordinated responses. Admiral Kane allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction. Lieutenant Martinez, it appears your analysis was correct again. What do you predict will happen next? Sarah studied the enemy formation, which was beginning to show signs of confusion as individual ship commanders tried to maintain their attack plan without central coordination. Without their command ship, they'll probably try to execute their original plan, but they won't be able to adapt to changing circumstances. This is our opportunity to defeat them in detail. Princeton Group reports contact with enemy formation. Captain Stevens announced over the communication system. Enemy ships appear to be in disarray. Requesting permission to engage. Princeton Group, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity, Admiral Kane replied. Focus on disrupting their formation and preventing coordinated attack. As the surface engagement began, Sarah monitored both the tactical situation and the enemy communications. The pattern she was seeing confirmed her predictions about how military units behaved when their command structure was disrupted. Enemy ships are breaking formation, she reported. Some are trying to continue the attack on Constellation Group, but others are turning to engage Princeton Group. They're fighting as individual units instead of as a coordinated force. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped would happen. A coordinated enemy attack against the small Constellation Group would have been devastating. But individual ship actions could be countered by superior American training and tactics. Constellation Group reports enemy submarine fire has ceased, Commander Williams announced. The surface submarines appear to be withdrawing from the area. Princeton Group reports successful engagement with 2 enemy vessels, Captain Stevens added. Enemy formation is completely disrupted. Individual enemy ships are beginning to withdraw. Sarah felt a surge of triumph as she realized that her analysis had not only predicted the enemy's plans but had also provided the framework for successfully countering them. The complex deception operation that had taken the enemy weeks to plan had been unraveled in less than 2 hours. Admiral Kane turned to face her, his expression showing a respect that was completely different from the skepticism he had displayed when she first arrived. Lieutenant Martinez, I owe you more than an apology. Your analysis didn't just help us avoid an ambush. It allowed us to turn the enemy's own plan against them. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. I'm just glad that the patterns were clear enough to predict their intentions. Don't minimize what you've accomplished, Admiral Kane said firmly. You saw through a sophisticated deception operation that fooled an entire intelligence team. More importantly, you had the courage to stand by your analysis when lives were on the line. As the immediate tactical situation stabilized, Sarah began to understand the broader implications of what had just happened. Her methods had been tested under the most demanding conditions possible, and had proven successful. More importantly, she had gained the respect and confidence of some of the Navy's most experienced officers. All units report status, Admiral Kane commanded. Over the next few minutes, reports came in from all the ships involved in the operation. The USS Constellation and her escorts had suffered minor damage but no casualties. The USS Hampton had successfully destroyed 2 enemy submarines and damaged a third. The Princeton Group had sunk 1 enemy cruiser and damaged 2 others while suffering only superficial damage themselves. Total enemy losses appear to be significant, Torres summarized. At least 4 vessels destroyed or heavily damaged, with the remainder fleeing the area. Our losses are minimal. Admiral Kane nodded with satisfaction, then turned back to Sarah. Lieutenant, I have a question for you. How did you develop the ability to see patterns that experienced intelligence analysts missed? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think it comes from looking at intelligence not just as data, but as a reflection of human decision-making. Military commanders, even enemy commanders, are human beings who think in patterns. If you can understand how they think, you can predict how they'll act. And the courage to stake everything on your analysis? That comes from understanding that in military operations there's no such thing as perfect information. You have to make decisions based on the best analysis available, even when you can't be completely certain. The alternative is paralysis, which is worse than being wrong. Admiral Kane was quiet for a moment, clearly impressed by her response. Lieutenant, I'm going to be recommending you for immediate promotion and assignment to the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Staff. We need analysts who can think the way you do. Sarah felt a thrill of excitement at the prospect, but also a sense of responsibility. Sir, I'm honored by your confidence, but I hope this operation can serve as an example of how intelligence analysis and operational planning can work together more effectively. Oh, it will, Admiral Kane assured her. This operation is going to be studied at the Naval War College for years to come, and your role in it is going to change how we think about intelligence analysis. As the task force began returning to normal operations, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. She had arrived on the aircraft carrier as a relatively unknown analyst whose methods were viewed with skepticism. She was leaving as someone whose analytical approach had been proven under combat conditions. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself. She had discovered that she could maintain her analytical clarity, even under intense pressure, and that she had the courage to stand by her conclusions when the stakes were highest. "Lieutenant Viper," Admiral Kane said with a genuine smile, "I think you've more than lived up to your call sign. You strike fast, you strike accurately, and you don't back down when you're certain of your target." As Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to return to her own assignment, she realized that this operation had been more than just a successful mission. It had been a transformation, both in how others saw her capabilities and in how she understood her own potential. The helicopter that would take her back to her base was already warming up on the flight deck. As she walked across the carrier deck one final time, Sarah could see the respect in the eyes of the sailors she passed. Word of her role in the operation had already spread throughout the ship. Admiral Kane accompanied her to the helicopter, wanting to personally see her off. "Lieutenant," he said as they reached the aircraft, "I have one final question." "What's next for you?" Sarah smiled as she climbed into the helicopter. "I'm going to keep looking for patterns, sir, and I'm going to keep predicting what the enemy will do next." As the helicopter lifted off from the carrier deck, Sarah looked down at the task force spread across the ocean below. She had helped save these ships and their crews by seeing patterns that others had missed. But more importantly, she had proven that analytical thinking and operational courage could work together to achieve success in the most challenging circumstances. The call sign Viper would never sound mocking to her again. She had earned it through her actions, and she would continue to live up to it in whatever challenges lay ahead.